I want to welcome you all to today's Sandwiching and History Tour. My name is Ashley Sides. I'm with the Arkansas Historic Preservation Program, and we're really happy to be able to do an in-person tour today. And this tour it's going to blend some of our sandwiching and history elements of a Friday lunchtime tour and our walks through history, where we actually walk around a historic district. And so it's actually going to be a little bit longer than a normal sandwiching tour. It may take, the better part of an hour, to be honest. Now I'll start the story right here by the railroad tracks, because this is where Conway began. Before the 1870s, this site here was more or less open country. There had been an important settlement at Cadron, 6 miles west of here at the bend of the Arkansas River. Much earlier, during the territorial era, was its heyday, I guess you would say. For a brief time in 1820, Cadron had been in the running to become the new territorial capital of Arkansas. But Little Rock was chosen, and you know the rest of the story, and Cadron eventually faded away. Conway County, created in 1825, originally covered a large swath of northern central Arkansas, including most of what is today Faulkner, White, Cleburne, Van Buren, Perry, part of Yell, and Conway counties. And besides Cadron, there were a few other settlements in the broader area before the Civil War. There was Polearm, Greenbrier, Enola, Mount Vernon, etc. But right here, prior to the 1870s, there was primarily just wilderness, scenic, open prairie, interspersed with trees. And in 1870, the Little Rock and Fort Smith Railroad was being built to connect those two cities, Little Rock and Fort Smith, under the leadership of Chief Engineer Colonel Asa P. Robinson. The railroad ran right through here because it had to pass through Cadron Gap. That's how it would get over the ridge. And so a depot was built at this spot, right there where Main Street is right now. And the railroad deeded a square mile of land around it to Colonel Robinson in 1871 for his services to the railroad. And Robinson knew that this site had potential as a regional market and a transportation hub for agricultural products from the area. Cotton was a major crop being farmed in this area, but it wasn't very convenient getting it to the nearest markets in places like Little Rock or Searcy. Before the railroad, travel was over rough terrain, by wagon, or by creeks and rivers where navigable. A rail depot here would draw trade from the entire region. So Robinson platted out the town site around the depot, which was known by the name of Conway Station. And the name was likely in reference to the name of the county that it was a part of, or to the important Arkansas political family with that name, or perhaps to a locomotive named Conway. Now, Robinson, as you're going to see, he aligned the streets with the railroad, and that's why the downtown street grid is kind of skewed and not laid out exactly east and west and north and south like the rest of the city. So he started selling lots around the depot, and the settlement began growing. Its future was assured when in 1873, Faulkner County was created, being carved out of parts of Conway and Pulaski County, and Conway Station was named the capital of this new Faulkner County, the county seat. And it was 2 years later, in 1875 then, that Conway Station actually incorporated as the town of Conway. Excuse me just a moment. At least one of the early settlers here had been part of the railroad construction crew, I would say probably several, and seeing opportunity here, he stayed. In German, Max Frauenthal, he was a German immigrant, although we're going to anglicize his name to Max Frauenthal. He set up a little wooden mercantile shop in 1872. So it was only the second store in Conway Station. Robinson had originally intended the main commercial center of the town to be Main Street and Railroad Street, what is now Parkway, although Railroad, I believe, was also on this side of the tracks. Businesses were meant to face the railroad on both sides of the tracks. There was no actual front street at first, but as the story goes, Max Frohenthal decided not to put his store there on the main business strip, but rather to locate in an alley over here behind the depot somewhere. That's where farmers coming into town would park their wagons, and Frohenthal would get their business first. It must have worked, because Frohenthal's business boomed, and Front Street ended up being the commercial hub along with Oak Street instead of Railroad and Main. The first buildings of the commercial district were wood frame structures, but in 1878, a fire destroyed most of the district and all of the wooden buildings, and all those original buildings were lost. So Max Frohenthal replaced his lost store with a new two-story brick building in Conway, and that 1879 Max Frohenthal building, or at least a portion of it, still stands today at 904 Front Street. We're going to walk by it later on, but you can, from where you're sitting, you may be able to catch a glimpse of it. I'll point it out in a minute. That store also featured the first plate glass window in Conway. So they were moving up in modern amenities. Now, this building here, the American Management Corporation that you see up there, that building at 824 Front also dates back, in its original form, dates to 1879, although it looks different now. It's also associated with Max Frohenthal. He partnered with his brother Joe Frohenthal and his cousin Leo Schwartz and built a hugely successful business selling farming supplies on credit and acquiring the farmers' capital when they couldn't repay the loans. So by 1883, M&J Frohenthal Company was the largest mercantile store in the county. In 1892, Max sold his part of the business to Joe Frohenthal and Leo Schwartz. The original building here also belonged to Frohenthal and Schwartz Company, but what we see today, right now, is a circa 1925 incarnation of that Frohenthal and Schwartz building when they expanded and they remodeled it. The architecture firm Sanders and Ginocchio joined it, the original building, with an adjacent one-story building to create this huge new building. And it's got a completely new facade from that era, from 1925. The design emphasizes function rather than style, although I would say it's quite an attractive building. And it includes Mediterranean and Italianate brackets. It became the first of its style in Conway and set the standard for future commercial buildings. As such, this Frohenthal and Schwartz building was individually listed in the National Register of Historic Places in 1992. The second-story windows were originally composed of 16 bays of 6 within 19 pane windows with transoms of prison glass over them, but they've now been reconfigured into 24 bays, each with 18 panes, and the transoms now correspond to the window bays beneath them, and they have 54 panes per section. But the building still retains the overall look of the 1925 remodel. Now, that's just one. There are 127 buildings in the downtown Commercial Historic District, so we're just going to hit the highlights. This district was placed on the National Register of Historic Places in 2010 with local significance, A, for its association with the early development in Conway, so historical associations, and also B, for its variety and quality of 19th and early 20th century commercial buildings, so architectural considerations. This district has just been resurveyed this year. A few of the buildings, since the original survey, the original listing in 2010, a few buildings have been lost. Some that had not been contributing properties at that time have been restored in a way that now they are able to be contributing properties in the district. And others that had been contributing at that time, some of them are no longer contributing. Having this historic district has helped Conway revitalize the downtown. Financial incentives like historic restoration tax credits and grants from the Arkansas Historic Preservation Program, and the Main Street Arkansas program also provides a lot of grant money and design consultation to help small businesses renovate their historic buildings. Another thing the Conway Downtown Partnership is coordinating to highlight the history of the downtown project, highlight the history of the downtown district in a way that also heightens its tourism appeal, is an art project called Tiny Toads. And there's not much to see yet, but it's coming soon. So they've got a public art grant from the Division of Arkansas Heritage for Main Street programs, which is the creation of 10 or so small sculptures of toads, each doing historic activities that are associated with various historic buildings. So, for example, at this building there will be a tiny toad sculpture for the Frauenthal and Schwartz building, and it'll be a toad shopkeeper with some of his wares from his mercantile shop. All right, now we are going to walk a few of the streets, and we'll see some more of the buildings in the district to get a sense of the scope of the history and the architecture that's represented here. Now, if you follow me, we're going to walk up here to Oak Street and turn left. We're going to cross the tracks and just pause at the district court parking lot. But here we are, the corner of Oak Street and Parkway. And I want to point out this building here, the red building right on the corner of Parkway and Oak. The red one, it's at 827 to 831 Parkway. That is the Donaghy building. It says so up at the top. It was built around 1905. George W. Donaghy was a carpenter and a building contractor who had a huge impact on Conway. This was one of multiple buildings he built in town, and he also played an instrumental role in bringing 3 colleges to Conway: Central Collegiate Institute, now Hendrix, Arkansas State Normal School, now UCA, and the Central College for Women, and the Central Baptist College uses their campus now. Donaghy, of course, later went on to become the 22nd governor of Arkansas between 1909 and 1913. The Donaghy building had been a contributing property in the historic district according to the original listing, but as of the 2022 survey, it no longer is. Now, if you look over here across the street to the Illustrated Sportswear building, that brick building with the blue awning, that building at 1316 Oak Street dates to about 1905. And it's a typical one-story early 20th century commercial building. It originally housed the Conway Printing Company, but by 1930, that was the home to the Log Cabin Democrat newspaper. And it is a contributing structure, contributing property in the historic district. Now, moving down here to the east, you see this building, the jewelry store. It actually, it's a unique 1910 building that has a different history than jewelry. It was built in 1910. Let's tell you about the architecture, and then I'll tell you the story of the building. You know, it's a Gothic revival style. The facade of this building is pretty unique with the battlements on top and top of the parapet and the elaborate brick corbelling between the battlements and the transoms. Originally constructed in 1910, but in 1921 that building became the Goad Brothers Cafe and Bakery. Luke Goad ran the kitchen and Judd Goad ran the bakery, and it was open 24/7 and was one of Conway's most popular restaurants for 36 years until it closed around 1957. And it is a contributing building in the district. There's going to be a tiny toad placed out front of this building as well. It'll be toad versions of Luke and Judd Goad holding a giant cookie that they've baked. I look forward to seeing that. All right, we're going to cross back over the tracks to Oak Street. I'm sorry, we're going to go to Front Street. We're going to cross back over to Front Street, and we're going to turn north on Front and pause right there on that sidewalk by the parking lot of Centennial Bank. Okay. So, while we're here, let's take a closer look at the Max Frauenthal building at 904 Front Street. It's this 2-story brown stucco building. This is the one that Frauenthal built after the 1878 fire, making it the oldest building in the historic district and the first brick building in the city. So it's a two-story building with Italianate influence that features a deep trim band and large eave brackets below at the cornice line and segmental arched paired windows at the second floor. The earliest Sanborn maps show it being a drugstore, but in 1930 it was the main cafe. It is a contributing building in the district. And now, looking over two buildings to the left of it, for the first nearly 20 years, Conway residents had to do their banking in Little Rock, until the Bank of Conway was founded in 1890. It was the first bank in the city, and this was its building here at 908 Front Street, where Crossman Printing is. Now, this was one of George Donaghy's first large building commissions, and it was built actually in the late Gothic Revival style. So imagine a cut stone facade, arched windows, an arched stone entrance, and a battlement on the north end. The current plain brick facade replaced the original one around 1985. And as best as I understand, it went from not contributing in the historic district in 2010 to contributing now. I didn't look into the answer for that. But historic building, whether it looks like the original way or not. Now we're going to, let's see. I want us to cross to the east side of Front Street and go up and stop right at the Van Ronkel intersection. Just have to watch out for the traffic. Well, this is the corner of Van Ronkel and Front Street. Now, these buildings just across the street here at 917 to 923 Front Street were constructed about 1900. They were originally the Floyd Cummins Furniture Store. That included both the two-story south part and the one-story part on the north side of the building. The south part is a great example of the Italianate style, with a deep trim band at the cornice line and 4 large eave brackets, brick soldier courses, and a central balcony with arched transoms over the door and the side lights. It is a contributing building in the district. Both of these actually are. Now, if you look across the street here to the north side of that building, the northwest corner of Van Ronkel, that building there is it was originally the Farmers State Bank building. Farmers State Bank was founded in 1912, and it was the third bank in Conway. But in 1918, this building was built for it. It was designed in the classical revival style by architects Thompson and Harding. It's the only other building in the historic district that is also individually listed on the National Register of Historic Places, having been listed in 1982. And according to that nomination form, it's the most formal and imposing of Thompson and Harding's several neoclassical designs for small-town banks. It's got 4 massive Tuscan engaged columns on the front elevation, and you can see the inscription Farmers State Bank up along with 2 laurel wreaths up on the parapet. Now, Farmers State Bank and the other bank in town, and the Bank of Conway and the other bank, they all went under during the Great Depression, but other banks rose to take their place, and banks have always occupied this building. It's currently home to First Security Bank. There's going to be a tiny toad at this location as well, right? A rich toad carrying a bag of money to the bank. It won't be real money, so. All right, we're going to take a few steps north just across the street here, and we'll pause about halfway up the block. Okay, let's look across the street to the west right now. These two buildings at 1017 and 1019 Front Street, they were built around 1900, and despite their different appearances, These two buildings actually belonged together originally. They were the Lehman Hotel. The street level had storefronts, and the second floor had hotel rooms. In the original historic district listing, both buildings were contributing properties, but with the latest survey, the south building is now non-contributing. Now if you turn around and look right behind you, this building is the historic Smith Ford showroom at 1020 Front Street. Smith Ford was founded in 1916 and is the oldest car dealership in Conway. They moved into this building in 1923. This two-story brick building is the only Art Deco style building in downtown Conway. And some of the notable architectural features are the brickwork on the parapet and this curved porch overhang. There were once 2 gas pumps in here as well. It is a contributing structure in the historic district, and it will have its own tiny toad. It'll be a toad driving a Model T, a 1923 Model T Ford. Now, adjacent to this building, to the south, we walked past kind of a hole between the buildings. There's an empty space. That empty space is the Conway, well, was the Conway Theater back in the day. The Smith family, who owned the Ford dealership, also owned the movie theater. And on this side, that was the front entrance. And then the main part of the theater angled off to the left behind the Ford building. You may be able to see that kind of angle as you walk by. So let's go back down Front Street. We'll go to Van Ronkel, and we're going to turn left, go out to Markham Street. All right, now this was an industrial area. Over there at 1016 Markham, where it says the Hole in the Wall Cafe, that is what remains of the old Enderlin and Cider Cotton Gin. It's not technically in the historic district, but I wanted to point it out because cotton is so fundamental to the city's history, and you know, so we see a remnant of that industry. In this vicinity, there were storage areas for cotton bales, a wagon yard, a mule barn over in that block for stabling your animal when you brought cotton to the gin, for example. There was a livestock auction stockyards, I believe, up in this area. A farmer's market over here on the northwestern side of the intersection. And this was also bus stop corner because buses from out of town would stop here. As you can see, this is a place where many people needed to come and do their business. They'd come in from out of town. Now, we're going to head south. We're going to cross Van Ronkel and pause on the other side of the intersection there. Okay, I wanted to pause right here, even though it's not the best place to view the building that I want to talk about, but you'll have a chance to see it later. Now, right down here, the building that's ahead of us on the northeast corner of Oak and Chestnut down there, 1022 Oak Street, that was built around 1915, and it housed John Grummer's hardware store and Adalbert Lakowski's tin shop. It still says Grummer Hardware Company in the floor tiles at the front entrance, so you'll be able to see that as we walk by in a moment. But in 1942, Walter Massey took over the hardware store and changed the name to Massey Hardware. He only ran the shop about 6 years, and it had different owners in the decades after that, but it continued to be known as Massey Hardware up until it closed in 1998. It is a contributing building in the district, and it will have a tiny toad, a little sculpture of a toad struggling with the giant hammer. But the reason I stopped here is that you can see the little building that's added on to the back of it, that little addition there, where Squisito is. That was actually used as a storage for the hardware store, and that it's one of the many places, many of the buildings that we're seeing that have been renovated with the help of tax credits from AHPP. So just thought I'd point that out. Okay, we're going to continue south to Oak Street. while we're here, I'm going to have you look down this street, down Chestnut Street. There is a small fieldstone building, the 1930 Central Arkansas Funeral Service building down Chestnut Street, about halfway down there. As you can see, it represents a different architectural style and era than most of the other buildings in the district, because it's a one-story standard commercial building constructed around 1930, but the thing is, it's built with mixed masonry. So there's fieldstone walls and brick coining at the corners of the building, the windows, and the door. Right here at the corner, the southeast corner of Oak and Chestnut, is the Kordsmeyer Furniture Building. And from our angle, I'm not sure if you can see the sign that says Kordsmeyer, but from another angle you'll be able to tell. I don't have the date that that building was built, but Kordsmeyer moved into it in 1956, selling furniture. They operated out of that building until 2017, so a good long time. It was a fixture here in Conway. The building's owner has been able to take advantage of tax credits for renovations, and so we have new things there now. All right, in a moment we're going to walk back down Oak Street towards the direction that we started. And as we go, I'll point out these two white buildings on the corner. The lower one, the two-story building at 1113 to 1115 Oak Street, that was the Central Meat Market building, built around 1910. It's a brick building with the facade of ceramic glazed brick. And like many other buildings in the district, it shows Italianate influence. It has wide overhanging eave, boxed with large eave brackets, and deep trim bands with dentils. Its rectangular windows on the second floor are set into recessed brick panels on the front facade, and on the east elevation, the windows are arched with brick hooding. Now, the next building to the west, the taller building at 1117 Oak Street, that one's actually a little bit 5 years younger. It's from 1915 or so, the Halter building. It was built with the same facade features as the Central Meat Market building, but it includes that third floor with arched windows set into recessed panels. The upper floors have housed several offices over the years, and the ground floor was known as the home of Greason's Drug Store until 1966. Those buildings are contributing properties in the district. They're going to have a tiny toad of two toads swing dancing. All right, we'll go ahead and head back down to the intersection, and actually let's make our way back to Simon Park. Okay, so we're on the corner of Main Street and Front Street. And again, remember, Colonel Robinson originally envisioned Main Street being the main commercial focus of the city. So, I mean, and there have been some significant businesses along Main Street and still are. It just isn't, it never became quite what Oak and Front Street became. Now here, this building on the corner of Oak, or Front and Main, I wanted to point it out because, yet again, a little bit of a different style, although it's similar to the Smith Ford showroom that we saw. And in its current state, you may not immediately see that because these big walls, the glass and metal walls, actually are a pretty recent addition. This had been opened up, and it was a service station. This is the Harton Service Station building. It was built around 1920. And so it had this recessed porch where, you know, cars could drive in, they had gas pumps, and this porch is supported by these two large brick columns here facing the south side. And even though they closed it off, and it still doesn't immediately strike you as a service station, if you look in there, you can see that. You can see its original character. And so I think for that reason, it is still able to be a contributing building in this historic district. Now there's a question, what does it mean contributing or non-contributing? And I'm sorry that I didn't clarify that earlier. So in order to have a historic district, you need to have historic buildings, which that's the obvious part. But you need to have at least 50% or more of your buildings be what's called contributing. That means they still convey the original historic aspect of the building. For whatever reason the district is considered historic, it could be for its association with history, or it could be for architecture or something like that. The building needs to actually have that quality. And so some buildings don't, because they may be a modern replacement of a historic building. They may not even look anything like the old building. So they're not considered contributing, but they're in the district because that's where they are. And so that's why I'm trying to highlight mostly contributing buildings along the way, or buildings that still tell the story. Now, there's a building here up at the corner of Oak and Front that you all know probably very well. You see that one with the big mural on it. That is within the district. It is within the time period of significance. It was built in 1960, and so that's kind of the far end of the period of significance for this district. But it's not a contributing building as it stands right now because it's been altered so much. Originally, that was the First State Bank building. It had a 2-story L-shaped main section built of Roman bricks and a 1-story steel-framed section with granite paneling and large windows. It still has those. But as it was built, it represented a typical mid-century commercial architecture with modern influences, including that flat roof, flat porch roofs, and the Roman brick. But it's undergone such a facelift that it really presents more of a contemporary look now. So it's non-contributing, but it's still an important building. City Hall used it for many years until they recently moved to this building down here. All right, well, as with many city centers around the country, Conway's commercial downtown experienced a decline over the course of the latter half of the 20th century as businesses moved out and buildings were not kept up. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, a concerted effort began to be made to save this historic downtown and to revitalize the city's core. The Conway Downtown Partnership was formed for this purpose, and the designation of the Conway Commercial Historic District in the National Register of Historic Places in 2010 also helped provide access to additional sources of funding. And Conway participates in the Main Street program, and that provides funding as well. So this is why we at the Arkansas Historic Preservation Program and the Main Street Arkansas program do what we do. We love to partner with communities to help preserve the historical structures and help keep those ties to the rich past. Helps cultivate community pride and the heritage of the town, and then gives something to build on for a rich and bright future. So I'm excited to see what Conway is doing. There's a lot of development going on that they're trying to be very thoughtful and careful about, and I think there's only good things ahead in the future. So thank you for joining us today. I hope that this history of downtown Conway enriches your experience in this city. I'm really glad you all came. Thank you very much.
Thank you for what you do with this program. It's very good. Very good. Very good.
Thank you.